Many people think they know what consistency is, but when it comes to applying it in their day-to-day life, they don't know how. Well, in this video, I'm going to explain some of the mistakes people make when it comes to applying consistency. There are two major mistakes people make when it comes to consistency. The first thing people mistake about consistency is the idea that by messing up just once, the habit is broken, and that all the benefits of doing the habit are lost, which is untrue. The second one is the confusion between intensity and consistency. So without further ado, let's dive into part one. So I think it's best if we tackle this first part with an analogy. So think of a person who's quite large, and he hears about the gym. He starts going to the gym. He hears about dieting, everything that you hear about when you start going to the gym. And he starts dieting, he starts eating healthier. He cuts out almost all junk food, and he's starting to get in shape. And then after a couple of weeks, he's still going strong. But then, it's his birthday's coming up, and then before you know it, it's his birthday. His family is celebrating with him, and they made him a birthday cake. And he doesn't want to be rude, so they've gone through all this effort for him. So, he has a bit of the cake. And what most people think is once they do this thing, so in this case, it's eating the cake while the diet obviously doesn't have cake in it. Most people think that, all hope's lost, that the habit is now broken of dieting, and they start to think that all these consequences will arise because they haven't remained consistent. Well, this isn't true. While it is true that if this kind of behavior were to continue, if you were to continue eating junk food, then yes, there would be consequences. But it's worth noting with any habit, if you mess up once, it's okay. But it's when that consistency of the good thing becomes consistency of the bad thing. So if you're consistently doing going to the gym, but then you have a cheat meal, but then you start having more and more cheat meals, now the consistency has gone to a bad habit, and that's not good. Because then the consequences of doing that habit will start to show, and the consequences of doing the good habit will show less because you're not doing it as much. So that's the analogy I like to use when I think of consistency and remaining consistent. And it's important that when you do mess up, because it's inevitable, you will mess up. It's important that you get back on track as soon as possible, and you're firm and harsh with yourself, but you're also reasonable. You don't beat yourself up over it, because it happens. We all mess up every now and then. We're human. But it's important that we get back on track as soon as possible and keep doing what we want to set our minds to. So yeah. The second part of the video is the confusion between intensity and consistency. And this is one that quite a few people struggle with, because intensity is kind of like the level to which you do something, like the amount of effort you put into doing a task, whereas consistency is it's the repetition of that activity. It's doing it regardless of intensity. It's just doing it whenever you said you would, remaining consistent. And it doesn't take into consideration the intensity, but it's worth noting that you should take intensity into consideration when we're talking about consistency. Because let's say you go to the gym 5 days a week, right? And you grab a dumbbell and you do 3 bicep curls, and then you leave. Let's say you do that every time you go to the gym for 6 months. The intensity of your workouts would be quite low, because you've only got one range of motion you're doing, which is your bicep curls. So it's not very beneficial. Yes, you're remaining consistent, but are you really even achieving that much if the intensity of your workouts are so low? That's what's important when we consider the link between intensity and consistency. If we don't think about one of them, then the other one's going to suffer. If we disregard intensity and we just try and remain consistent, there's not a huge point in remaining consistent if we have no intensity. Basically, what I'm trying to get across is that we have to take both of these things into consideration. We can't just talk about consistency and we can't just talk about intensity, and it's about finding that balance in between them. We can't have, too much intensity because then our consistency will drop. And then, if your intensity is like off the charts, it's very unlikely that you'll be able to remain consistent with a good habit. If you, try and run 20 Ks every time you go for a run and you want to try and remain consistent and do it every day, it's going to be extremely hard for you. Your body's going to, be sore every day you do it. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it'd be extremely hard. But then if your intensity is really low, your consistency will be high, but the results that you're trying to get from, your desired habit or activity will be much lower. If you have any other questions about consistency or intensity or the mistakes people make when learning about it, then feel free to ask me in the comments if you have any questions. There's also tons of videos online about consistency, and in the future I want to make some videos on remaining consistent, not just the mistakes people make, but how to remain consistent. Before I go, I'll leave you with the quote, as I do, and it is, every action you take has a consequence, either positive or negative. I hope you learned a thing or two in this video, and have a nice rest of your day.